Welcome to another edition of Great Companies, Great Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Christine Gannon. I'm the founder and CEO of Brightworks Consulting. And today I'm honored to host a special edition of our podcast to celebrate International Men's Day. We have both Pat Milligan and Rob Baker with us as we celebrate this event. And our conversation today is part of our mission to connect with companies who are committed to fostering an environment where the differences that we're born with and those that we acquire throughout our lives are understood, valued, and celebrated. I'd like to share a little bit about today's conversation and a little bit about our guest today. So Rob is a recognized thought leader, speaker, and executive coach, mentor, and consultant. He works in partnerships with business leaders, helping them overcome organizational challenges to build an inclusive culture and unleash the potential of their talent. Rob has over 40 years experience in global HR consulting, and he led the International Diversity and Inclusion Consulting practice at Mercer. He developed a portfolio career and has reinvented himself for his next chapter. Rob is the founder and CEO of his own business, Potentia. Did I say that, Rob, right?
Indeed, absolutely.
Potentia Talent Consulting, which provides consulting and workshops for companies on DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Rob is also a sought-after keynote speaker at conferences. He's also an executive coach and has extensive experience in coaching male executives in diversity and inclusion, which will be a strong topic for us today. He's a board member of European Women on Boards and is the D&I strategist tasked with providing input to the board on its long-term strategic growth plan, championing European women on boards to external stakeholders and supporting the development across all aspects of diversity. Rob, welcome.
Thank you, Christine. Lovely to be with you and lovely to be with you, Pat.
Thanks.
Also want to take a moment to introduce our executive director of Brightworks and my business partner, Pat Milligan, who is a recognized innovator and pioneer in her field and a highly sought after expert in DE&I, human capital, and people strategy. Pat served as a strategic advisor to the World Economic Forum, playing a key role contributing to groundbreaking research on gender parity, talent mobility, and the future of jobs in a post-COVID world. She also served as a member of the Milken Institute Center for the Future of Aging and was a contributing author to Silver to Gold, the Business of Aging in partnership with AARP. Pat was also the president of Mercer's North American region and the president of the Global Talent Business and the architect of When Women Thrive. She spent 15 years at Mercer in varying leadership positions and extensive experience in other HR consulting firms. She is a published researcher and has won several awards for her leadership and perspective on women in the workplace, DE&I, and the future of work. Honored to be with both of you today. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Christine. Great to see you, Rob. Great to connect.
Yay, Pat, good to see you again. Absolutely.
So the first question, Rob, I want to pose your way is in anticipation of tomorrow's celebration of men and International Men's Day. I know that we share the belief that all men matter. In any organization, from the C-suite to middle managers, colleagues, and peers, all men can and do make an impact on the career and experience of women that they work with. So when you and Pat worked together, you focused a lot on men in the middle and how they contribute, but also could be threatened by the focus on women. So we just really love to hear your views on how your thinking has evolved on the role of the middle manager and that related to men in the middle.
Great. Should I kick off?
Please do.
Please.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think men at the people manager level are the, absolutely essential people that we need to start engaging with this and engaging more because they have so much control over the working lives of the people that work with them. And whether that's hiring or promoting or trying to retain women in the workplace, for example, these middle line managers, people managers have a huge role to play. So given that probably over 60% of people managers are men in organizations, it's really important that we engage them. And what we're seeing is they are at the sharp end because they're trying to solve the issues of running the business today and the very real challenges of needing to hire quickly because there's something that needs to happen. with sort of doing that against the backdrop of where an organization is trying to get itself better placed for the future, where, for example, they might want to, they certainly should want to achieve more gender equality. So these guys are often in the middle of what the corporate ambitions, as it were, but the actual very real pressures in the day job. So we see that they're absolutely critical. And so spending time working with them so that they can see there's an upside for them in being open to gender equality is absolutely a key thing we need to do.
And Rob, can you expand a little? So this whole question of how do you really make this a win-win? You've been doing some research on why do men thrive in a more diverse environment. Can you just talk a little bit about how you both engage men in the conversation, but also it's more than just career, right? So one of the things your research shows is that the focus on DE&I benefits them in their whole lives, in their lives and their work. And so how do you actually make that a compelling value proposition for men, particularly when there's such a focus on retention, attraction, and promotion of women? What are your real experiences and how do you craft that message?
Well, we spend a lot of time talking about why they should engage with this at all. And of course, there's a corporate why it's good for the company, but we also focus a lot on why it's good for them as individuals and try and understand what are the sort of drivers for them in wanting to engage in gender equality. I mean, for me, for example, one of the things that was very powerful was coming across a Gloria Steinem quote, which was basically saying, look, when men are allies for women, they're actually also able to liberate themselves. And that was a key thing about, wow, I can escape male stereotypes if I actually am part of this gender equality movement. So we're trying to get into that kind of what drives individual men. And a lot of the work that I've done with male leaders, it's often around things around their perception of justice and fairness, and why they want their workplace to be a better place. I mean, sometimes obviously they're quoting things like their fathers of daughters, etc. That comes up, of course, a lot. They want their world to be a better place for their daughters. So it's trying to establish that personal why, and then really kind of trying to bring out that actually they can thrive in an environment where there's more focus on gender equality, providing they're the kind of leaders that really understand what is needed. And there, what we're talking about is the kind of leadership which brings more emotional intelligence, for example, into how they work with others. So the collaboration, the care, the empathy, all of those things, which I think historically, women have obviously majored on, but actually men can learn how to do. So trying to show them that really the leaders of the future are the ones that have got these kind of skills. They know how to navigate diversity and inclusion and gender balance, and that if they can learn a bit more about how to do that, they can be a very desirable leader, because companies don't want all women leaders. They don't want all men leaders. They want a balance, right? So so we need men. We're going to need 50% of the leaders to be men. It just happens to be men that really get this and really understand about diversity and inclusion.
Great.
I would add a couple things to what you said, Rob. So many amazing points. One of the interviews, and a strategic partner of ours, Donato Tramuto, has written a book recently about compassionate leadership, the double bottom line. And so we're looking at that with him in terms of that element and why it's so important to the DE&I strategy, and how it's often, from a male perspective, potentially not only men, but an element that might be missing or could be enhanced. So appreciate you touching on that. And then also, there's recent research that shows when men and women are in leadership together, they complement, and it's stronger and it's strengthened.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I often present to male-dominated executives is what women bring to business. And there's all of this stuff around different perspectives, different views of risk, for example, different leadership styles. Any company that doesn't have access to that is really missing out. And so that's kind of what I sort of bring out. And then going back, I think, to the benefits for men, there's a huge amount of research around the mental health benefits for men and engaging in all of this too. So bringing out the benefits for them in terms of relationships with women in their lives at home and at work, bringing out the benefits for them in terms of their mental health, and their ability, for example, to liberate themselves from some of these stereotypes is, it's really kind of builds up in the end quite a compelling picture about why they should engage in this.
Absolutely. So we've gotten a lot of feedback that women, particularly in certain industries, and Pat talked about this a little bit earlier, including tech, are not being listened to. They're still being talked over, and all the classic things that we've experienced as women over our careers. Is there any innovative training or engagement strategies that you've seen or implemented or helped organizations with that help men learn to communicate and listen differently, more effectively?
Well, I think the first thing is to make them aware of what's actually happening. And a lot of men just aren't aware that this is happening because they're never on the receiving end of it. So one of the things that are on a lot of companies is a kind of voice of the women exercise. In other words, as a male leader in the organization, are you aware of what the women's experiences are, what their voices are? Because often if you listen to what they're saying there are all these issues about microaggressions and being asked to do office housework and all of that sort of stuff. And, and one of the things actually, we did when I was at Mercer, which was very effective, was getting a video made of, I think it was 6 women in various positions in the organization, just relating to their male colleagues, how they saw, for example, the time of day we fix meetings, how assumptions were made about things like who does what in an office meeting. And it was very, eye-opening to the men. I mean, it was a real aha moment, I think, for many of them. So I think there's this first thing about just getting them to acknowledge that they're not necessarily seeing at the moment what the issues are, but bringing to them the fact that women do have these experiences and experience life differently, and then having a discussion then about how that works. And so I think that can be very valuable.
Agree.
And do you think, Rob, so one of the questions we've really had is, how do you integrate the effectiveness of a male leader and the assessment of a male leader in terms of how do the women feel about working on their team, working in their environment? There's one thing about awareness, but then I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about accountability, because one of the things we've been struggling with is you make the investments in training, awareness, and education, and a year later, nothing really feels like it's changing. We're feeling like we're getting to the point where integrating in assessments, is your team really thriving? Is everyone on the team thriving? What is your view about accountability? Because there's this curve, right, of you want to bring people along, you want to be positive, but there is a point at which you can't get the culture change you want if leaders aren't leading with the empathy, with the inclusion, with the inquiry. So are you seeing organizations willing to at least pick leaders of the future based on a more holistic leadership model that includes that empathy and that ability to really engage an entire team?
Absolutely, Pat. And I was looking recently at something that SAP posted about the leaders that it wants to have in its organization. It's all about inclusivity and understanding, kind of what it takes to bring out the best of everybody in the organization. But I would certainly agree about this point on accountability, that it needs to be there. And, there's that old saying, isn't there, about, what gets measured gets managed. So I think it's about measuring progress and then holding people accountable for it, both in terms of performance reviews and, of course, in some companies, even remuneration being linked to progress in this. I know of a couple of companies that I'm working with that are basically kind of docking the pay if they feel that actually progress isn't being made or it having an impact on bonus, which really gets the attention. So I think we do need to see that flowing through into accountability. But I think it's also about having a holistic view here of what it takes to create change. And one organization I'm working with, I think, has got quite a good approach to this, because they are running a women's development program to train the women leaders that they need for the future, because they want to get to 50% in managerial positions, and they're currently at 30%. So they've got a bit of work to do there to get more women into leadership. But they're also running a men's program to explain to the men, like, why are we doing this? Where do you fit in? How can you support it? And also, what do we expect of you as a male agent of change? Because basically, we're going to be looking at you to move the dial on this. And by the way, we're going to hold you accountable, and we're going to put a proportion of your bonus on the line here.
Wow.
And actually, in that environment, you're seeing more focus on it.
That's phenomenal. It'll be interesting to come back and see their progress and success, right? 12 months out, 24 months out.
Well, what we're seeing already is because we're running, once we put them through workshops to kind of like, kind of bring them up to speed on all of this, we then run individual coaching sessions with them as male leaders to say, okay, so now how are you putting all this into place in your actual day job, right? Because you've been through the workshop. So often people go through workshops and it's kind of like back to the office on Monday and like nothing changes, right? But this coaching that sits alongside them enables them to then work with their coach to build this into what they're trying to achieve on a daily basis. And having set out, if you like, the job description of the agent of change, i.e. this is what you kind of need to do. So, sponsor a woman, be intentional about how you're recruiting, call out bias where you see it, all of those things, for example. We're then trying to make sure they're actually delivering that in their everyday role. And the coach is there to help them with issues that arise. The other thing we're also trying to do is link them together so that male allies can lean on other male allies to learn what works, what doesn't work, support for each other, etc. So I think you need this accountability we talked about, but you also need to provide that support framework, recognize that this isn't easy to do necessarily alongside everything else. And it's providing that support so that they really can understand how they can really put this into practice. And then already what I'm seeing we're now 6 months into the first program, we're already seeing men doing things as agents of change, which they probably wouldn't have been doing had they not been through the program. So I think we're seeing early signs of it being having some kind of impact.
So one thing, Rob, in our prior work in prior worlds, one of the things that we talked a lot about was creating an environment where it is safe for men to be sad. And what do I mean by that? I mean, there are absolutely industries and organizations where to achieve the level of diversity and gender representation and equality, you are going to advantage one part of the population over another. And that is the reality. And I had the honor of, really listening to someone like a Michael Dell and his moonshot goals about 50-50 representation. But that really meant that this was the time in the development of an organization that you were going to advantage one group over another. And if you were a young male, that could actually make you very sad, right? That I want to be enlightened. I want to be a sponsor. I want to be a leader. But wow, 20 years ago, I would have been the person they were talking about to get that job. And that leans into this conversation about sometimes, depending on the industry, it's not always, it may not be a win-win from a pure career perspective. And so one of the things I'd love to hear you talk about is you have sessions for men, but one of my all-time favorite were some of the focus groups that you and our colleague Ilya Bonek did with men to make it safe to say, I didn't think I'd be at this point in my career. And so there are amazing life benefits, right? So those of us that have sons and they have wives and daughters and they feel that, but there is some sadness about why not me? And how do you actually work with men to let them feel that, but then see the benefits, the other side of their life, a more holistic life? And I know that was a long question, but there is some sadness, right? That people experience.
I think absolutely. We'd be ill-advised not to be aware of that. We talk about listening to the voice of others, right? Well, we've got to listen to the voice of these men, right? And how they feel about things. So I think there's a certain acknowledgement that that life isn't quite the same as maybe it might have been 20 years ago. Obviously, there's a recognition, hopefully, that there's a leveling of the playing field going on here. So some of the ease within which some of these men got into these roles is maybe not quite so much there anymore. But nevertheless, I think there's a recognition that it's harder. And one of the men that I'm coaching, for example, at the moment, he applied for a role which actually went to a woman instead because the company concerned was wanting to put a woman into that role, and she was very well qualified for it. And his reaction, I thought, was very mature, which is, okay, look, I am sad that I didn't get the role, but what can I do to support her? Because I want to show that, I want to play a part in helping the organization succeed. And maybe there'll be another role for me at some point where the fact that I've been through this process has been good for me, enabled me to really, kind of come out the other end as a better leader. So, but I think you're right. I mean, we do have to acknowledge the fact that maybe the set of opportunities is reduced. But like I said before, I think if men buy into what they need to do to be leaders of the future, at least they've got a reasonable chance of kind of getting further and having some progress. But yeah, the landscape is changing, and I think we'd be foolish to ignore that and the impact that it might have on them. But so we need to give them a space, and we need to share that and listen to what they're saying.
Great feedback.
So a couple of final questions for you as we round out this podcast. One is, if we have a male or female CEO listening and they aren't certain where to start, I'm thinking about the work that you're doing right now where you're hosting male workshops and you have a women's development program. How would I, as the CEO, prep the organization to receive this? Did you start with a survey? Did you start with communication? Just thinking, if someone's trying to figure out where to start, how would they do that?
Well, the organizations that I'm working with where I've seen a successful start have been the ones where the CEO has linked it to the business imperative of them, thriving. So I'm thinking, for example, of a company I'm working with at the moment who said, look, we're in the energy business, but we want to transition to clean energy. If we're going to transition to clean energy, we need a different approach and we need a different talent set. We need to start thinking more widely about where we get our talent from. So I think a CEO that can link it to an organizational imperative as to why we're doing this and why we need to do it in order to thrive is pretty important. But of course, then they need to know, okay, so then how do we bring this about? And that's where they need, the talent, the HR teams, the management teams to work with them to put these programs into place. And obviously, fortunately, they've got kind of people they can bring in, whether it's consultants or whatever, to help support with this. But I think it's thinking through the holistic program, really, which is basically saying, look, okay, we have a goal where we do want to achieve more equality in our senior leadership, for example, and greater gender balance. How do we do? Who do we need? Who are the stakeholders in this? Who do we need to really think about? And so I think it's just thinking that through from all those different levels. And one area, for example, that I saw was very effective, that a CEO quoted, was one of their business partners. They were working alongside another company that was more progressed in gender balance and diversity and inclusion than they were. They said, we cannot be a partner very easily with this other organization if we're lagging behind. We need to be making progress. So I think it's finding the reasons that really accord with all of the people in the organization about why the company needs to do it. But then it's about okay, how do you work and put programs together that really start to engage people, in that personally?
Right. Tying it to the business imperative is so key, as well as the values of the organization, right?
Of course. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how do you keep your energy? You've been in this space for so many years and one of the most respected men in this space, and your voice is well heard. What advice do you have for men just starting out in their careers? And do you feel more or less optimistic for them?
Wow. What a great question.
I know. That was my question, Rob, actually. So I am fascinated. I am deeply fascinated by it. Takes, the energy it takes and what you've been contributing, but it's a long-term change process, right? So what we are constantly trying to motivate younger men to actually, it's worth the time and effort. So I just wanted to make sure we could learn, we could let them hear your voice on that.
Well, no, absolutely, Pat. And I think what's critical for me is having a passion about this and having a mission, which, you really feel you can make a difference. I really feel that I can have an impact. As Pat knows, I could have hung up my consulting boots and decided to go on cruises and play golf and all the rest of it. And I do some of that, but I wanted to kind of also play a role in the world where, I feel that, we are all moving together in sort of right direction. And so for me, just having that mission and that, is really what gets me up. My wife was saying to me the other day, my God, you seem to be working harder than when you were working at Mercer. Why are you getting up at 5:30 in the morning to do stuff? It's like, but I'm keen to get stuff finished. I'm keen to progress stuff. keen to get things moving. And then I think when I talk to other men, particularly the group of men we work with on this research we've done recently, we had some very, very cogent reasons from those male leaders as to why they're engaged in this work and the passion that they have for it. And, I mean, some of it's quite simple. One of them said, actually, I've found since I'm a leader doing this kind of work, people actually come to me more. I'm more they somehow see me as more approachable as a kind of leader that they can seek help from. So, I think it is about having that why, basically. And for me, that's what gets me up, keeps me going. And of course, I am looking at the whole picture. So I've got to look at my health and well-being as well. Make sure I've been to the gym first thing this morning or whatever it is. Keep all that side of things going. Eat well, etc. Get my sleep, all of those good things. But the great thing is doing all of that and then working with like-minded people that share this mission as well is such a joy. And I think we get energy off of each other, don't we? So here am I with two amazing women having a great conversation. The energy you guys have just given me to go and take away into my next meeting is incredible.
That's great. That's great.
Rob, thank you so much for being with us today. If people want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
Well, they'll find me on LinkedIn, Robert Baker, Potentia Talent Consulting, and they'll find me at robert@potentia-talent.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be with you. And Pat, lovely to see you again, and looking forward to our future. I'm sure we'll have future collaborations and future discussions. So thank you once again.
Excellent. Thank you for your work and the contribution. And it is making a difference. So thanks, Rob.
That's good to hear, Pat. Thanks.
Brightworks Consulting hosts this podcast and YouTube channel to spotlight the leadership around the world that is changing lives. Brightworks offers a myriad of consulting services in the public and private sector, to include diversity, equity, and inclusion solutions for any size company. You can find us at www.brightworksconsulting.com. We're honored to have Best Companies AZ as a presenting sponsor for this podcast. Best Companies AZ is your #1 source for regional employer branding. You can find them at www.bestcompaniesaz.com.